Welcome back. MTG Joe here. Today we are going to be looking at our first kind of batch of data for a weekly meta breakdown on the historic best of one format. If you haven't been keeping up with historic, about a week and a half ago we got two nerf announcements. Orcish Bowmaster no longer pings on ETB, so you don't get to kill every one toughness creature in the format. And the One Ring now has an activated ability cost of 1 mana in addition. So effectively, while it still fogs on turn 4, you need 5 mana in terms of activating. So what this means in a kind of broader sense is 1 toughness creatures are now playable again. Things like Thalia, Esper Sentinel, Crucius, all the elves, Llanowar Elves, Elvish Mystic, all those kind of cards are playable again. As well, we've seen a reduction in the number of Bowmasters being played, so card draw spells are also on the menu again. I was playing with Seasoned Pyromancer, which felt so good again. One of my favorite cards. So things like that. Like a deck I haven't had a chance yet to play with, but I'm going to give it a shot, is the Shaman's deck. That was always one of my favorite decks in the format. It was completely kind of nerfed because the deck draws a lot of cards, but you can't draw cards when stupid Bowmaster's there. So one thing we're going to kind of take a look, see how it plays out. So we're going to take a look. It is still fairly early. Usually Historic takes a couple weeks to get the data. So I'm going to show some untapped data, what we see on the screen. I also will show some deck lists I've been doing, or not necessarily doing well, but like fun deck lists if you want to take a look. There is one deck list, the blue-white control deck, that I've been doing pretty well with. Basically a port of Missman's best of 3 list in best of 1, just kind of configuring for the meta that we're seeing there. And then I went through and pulled up some deck lists of ideas, things that should be good in the new format, given that Bowmaster is not being seen as much play. So things like Auras, Kethis, and I found a really cool Storm Herald list that's putting up like a crazy win rate as well. So as always, we get the data from Untapped. If you want to use Untapped, aggregate your win rate data, track your games. Link is in the video description. Paste all the deck lists, timestamp them. Whole deal. You can see it there. I switched the banner above. Welcome to feedback. If it's too big, what you think about it. Really, it's just to kind of clean up the links or the tabs and stuff as I kind of play. But looking at popularity of decks for the day, Wizards by and far are the most popular deck at 20%. Followed by Mono Green at 12. So we're seeing a lot of these decks in the format. Wizards is probably going to be the deck you run into most often. It won the Arena Championship in best of 3, and it is a very good deck that did not get hit by the nerf. Mono Green Devotion actually gets probably better now because Bowmaster was a way to kind of ping your elves, so you have to play Halfling. Now you can play the elves instead of the halfling, which makes it easier for things like Old Growth Troll. While halfling does make your Karns uncounterable, it lets you play your Kiora. It was a little awkward at times when that was your only accelerant, so you couldn't always turn 3 an Old Growth Troll. So it'll be interesting to see over the coming weeks if folks kind of revert back to that. We might also see some folks go to the Leyline of Anticipation plan again. So it's really interesting to see how over the next couple weeks this deck evolves. Mono Green Elves is a popular deck usually in like the Platinum ranks. Mid win rate. This was a deck that, again, completely unplayable with the Elves. Blue-White Control. Reprieve is really, really, really good right now, as well as Divine Purge, in part because Affinity is coming back. The Artifact decks, Retrofitter Foundry decks, Esper Sentinel decks, Auras decks, the Dredge decks, all these things get swept up by Divine Purge, and it is a hell of a card. I've been like tempo reprieving people, making them cast the same spell over and over again, and it's beautiful. Kind of doing that. It's my villain arc. I put away my Ember Cleaves, and now I'm playing Archmage Charms. So it's just kind of looking at that. So if we look at kind of the trends, we see Wizards just kind of take off, similar with the Mono Green Devotion list. Everything else is kind of scattered at that point. So looking right now, just kind of going over the stats, we're going to look at 17,000 games for the week, October 10th through the 14th. So not even a week, 4 days worth of data, just looking at kind of the nerf meta, giving you kind of a sample there. So we're going to jump into it with Wizards. They are at 65% win rate at 460 games. And if we're looking at the list, Pretty refined list. The notable inclusion with these lists is they've gone sleight of hand over opt. Now, this was based on the championship list. With Bowmaster going away, you can likely go back to opt and then just kind of play there. The opt puts the card in the graveyard, which at times can be beneficial. Both effectively give you some sort of pseudo card advantage. I do prefer the instant speed interactions, in part because it allows you to get tricky in terms of combat damage. It also lets you play stuff on your opponent's turn, which can be relevant at times. This version as well is an interesting configuration. We see Strangle over instead of the full set of Play with Fire. That's actually really good in the mirror, allowing you to have a 1-mana answer if you're on the draw for an opponent's turn 1 Symmetry Sage or turn 2 Dreadhorde Arcanist. You don't necessarily always have the chance to set up Wizard's Lightning. This version's also on Reckless Rage, which is a 4 damage burn spell, which also helps very much in the mono green matchup. This deck is very favored against mono green, given that it's so linear in terms of aggression. What I really like of this version too, full set of Flame of Anor. This card provides a hell of a lot of advantage, full set of expressive iteration to kind of grind out in that regard. Mana base, we see the 3 Fiery Islets and the 2 Den of the Bugbears as the utility lands, 21 lands in total with the Spikefield Hazard. Kind of hanging out there in the corner. Spikefield gets a little bit better now because we're going to see a lot more 1 toughness creatures. So being able to pick off Thalias, Esper Sentinels, any random elf, stuff like that. Speaking of the Affinity deck, we have 59% win rate, and this is kind of the throwback to the deck itself. There's a new infinite combo that can be played with some of these cards as well. I tried it out in the Red-White Thopters deck, which is another deck that if you had in the past could be super reasonable again. It's an infinite damage combo with the new Dollmaker. We'll cover it a little bit later, but kind of the core of this deck, one of the pillars of the old Historic before Bowmaster came around was these Retrofitter Foundry decks. So having a way to turn your Thopters, Ornithopter, the Hopagirapur, any of these cheap artifacts into 4/4s in a grindy game lets you just create more tokens. Portable Holes is removal, Esper Sentinel for card advantage. This version's also going back to the innovative meta tech as a way to kind of seek some cards. Vault Scourge, 1 mana card here that's evasive, and then you're kind of just throwing down artifacts and then giving them boosts with Soul Artifact or Mashiko's to kind of get some value. Ingenious Smith also card advantage in this deck. You have Darksteel Citadels for Soul Artifacts kind of prop on there. One thing to be mindful of, folks, if you're playing against Mono Green Devotion, Karn shuts off your artifact lands from tapping, and if they plus on your lands go away. So just be mindful. They could become a land destruction deck very easily in those matchups. This is also a Luris companion deck. We then go to Izzet Belcher, 57%. This is an interesting configuration. I think it was Strider Stone on his channel got it. So the kind of innovation, tech changes, 2 Charming Scoundrels, 2 Wily Goblins, notably both of these come down for 2 mana, can be blockers, and create a treasure token, allowing you to ramp up. The kind of core of the deck is you're not playing any real lands, you're playing all these dual face cards. So when you cast a Charbelcher and activate it, you basically deal damage equal to the number of cards in your library to your opponent. You're able to use Ironcrag Feat to generate enough mana to cast and activate the Charbelcher in the same turn with Pact of Negation backup. Now, the thing is, by playing these creatures, you actually make your Indomitable creativity worse. So this is something where normally you'd have creativity, you target any of your artifacts, and it will guarantee hit Belcher. That's not always the case in this deck because you can hit any of these creatures instead. It just reveals until you hit an artifact creature. So one thing to kind of note there, if you do want to go with this creature package, I think cutting the creativities, playing some Strangles could be reasonable. Wizards can race you some of these aggressive decks, so just having cheap 1 mana removal can also be helpful. This deck's on March of Reckless Joy is an instant speed way to kind of dig for the combo as well. Speaking of Mono Green Devotion, we are here and we are devoted. So we already see kind of the inclusion of elves here. We have the full halfling, the split of the elves with Utopia Sprawl. So now there's 12 1-mana accelerants, 2 mana accelerants, just allowing you to kind of get ahead on mana. We have Vorinclex, Cavaliers as your top end. And really with this deck, you're just trying to generate huge amounts of mana with Nykthos. You have your Karn that can tutor stuff, so Graveyard Hate, Lifelink Trample. You could blow up people's lands or activate, like if their creature has an activated ability, or even like an opponent's Planeswalker. If you have Karn out, on your upkeep, you can target that your opponent's upkeep. You target that permanent, and then Karn's static ability shuts it off. Tax effects. If your opponent is playing something like Heliod Combo, or like random deck that just can't, like Dredge can't beat this card with Platinum Angel, then you have Cityscape Leveler and Portal to Phyrexia as well. Karn also incidentally shuts off Belcher. It shuts off like a lot of the affinity style effects. I actually really want this card to go away from like every format. I think it's a miserable play design. At the very least, I want them to errata the static. There's a lot of cool things you could do in these formats that Karn just like, oops, you can't do it now. Like I was playing Explorer, and there's a Hardened Scales, what is it? The Agatha Soul Cauldron deck that's playing like a modular sub-theme. But all your things are artifacts, so you can't activate the abilities of them. So it like just randomly houses things. Like the Saheeli combo we're going to look at. Saheeli, you basically, like you turn Saheeli into an artifact, and then you can go infinite. Karn shuts that off. Like there's so many things that Karn shuts off that just, I'm tired of kind of playing to that. But welcome your thoughts on that. I think this card's design is just awful. And like they've addressed Bowmaster, they've addressed to some extent the One Ring. I think this and Shieldred are two of the remaining kind of cards that are just overarchingly poor design. So then kind of going to the Dredge deck at 53.5%. With Dredge, you're basically going to see two variants. You're going to see a straight Dimir, and then you're going to see a Golgari version. The Golgari version has access to Grizzly Salvage, but the core of the deck is putting cards from the top of your library into the graveyard. By doing that, you flip things like an Archamoeba, you get Creeping Chills. Creeping Chills bring back your Silver Smoke. Any creature coming back from your graveyard gets you your Prized Amalgam. Wonder gives your creatures flying. Bloodghast comes back with lands, and you put cards in your graveyard with things like Founding, Glimpse the Unthinkable, Salvage, Stitcher, Otherworldly Gaze kind of mixed into there. This deck has some ridiculous like turn 1 and 2s at times, and then other times you can go through 2/3 of your deck and then just not hit like the right sequence of things. I've had times where, top 10 cards are 4 Creeping Chills, which feels great, and then other times they're in the bottom 10. So a bit of how your deck gets stacked. So make sure to pay the rigged shuffler to get the premium draw. So these are a couple decks from MTG Decks that I just wanted to kind of highlight. So some of these will be best of 3 lists, but I think they're super reasonable to pull into best of 1 as well. So we have Kethis Combo. Kethis, very powerful. This one's from Crokies, 14-1. He's playing this in Mythic. But kind of the core of the deck, you have Kethis, and then you're milling over cards from your library, and you could basically create a loop. Things like Emery lets you recast stuff from your graveyard. Kinnan lets you recast stuff from your, or Kethis lets you cast stuff from your graveyard. Kinnan generates extra mana. Rona helps you loop. You basically start chaining together Mox Ambers to generate a whole bunch of mana. And then what you do is you have Jace the Perfected Mind, which you can keep casting to mill yourself multiple times. So you're able to generate enough mana through just exiling cards in your graveyard. And then you recast Jace, and then you mill out your opponent. You also have the alternative win condition with Jace Wielder Mystery. If you mill out your library, you can cast Jace, draw a card, win the game that way. The tech that the deck got was Agatha Soul Cauldron, which lets you basically turn any of your creatures into Kethis, or any of the other activated abilities. So now your Kethis can also be Emery's, that can be Rona's, that can be Kinnan's. So you get a whole bunch of value. So think like Rona untaps every time you cast a legendary creature. So what you can do is create a loop where if it has both Rona's ability and Emery's ability, or just one of them tacked onto the other, you can tap it to use Emery's ability, cast a Mox Amber. Mox Amber's legendary, it triggers the Rona ability, so you untap the creature, and then you can kind of just loop that way as well. So kind of a sweet combination of cards there. This one's very click intensive at times, so practice does make perfect with it. This can turn 3 kill, pretty consistent. We then go to this deck's wild. So 175 and 87, 66% win rate. Storm Herald combo. So Storm Herald, haste. When it enters the battlefield, return any number of aura cards from your graveyard to the battlefield attached to a creature. So basically, what you're doing with this deck, you're milling yourself. And then you're getting Storm Herald into play, either casting or reanimating. And then it stacks up with a whole bunch of pants, as they say, and smacks into your opponent. So you can put cards into your graveyard with like Otherworldly Gaze, Faithless Looting, Collective Brutality, Glimpse the Unthinkable. You have an Earth. That's another way to get back your Storm Heralds. And then what are we hitting with enchantment? So you have Founding of the Third Path to kind of mill and then let you recast stuff, including the Unearths. You have Ancestral Mask that gets +2/2 for each other enchantment on the battlefield. Now, notably, this is your opponent too. It's just on the battlefield, both sides. So it gets really big. I do not know what Crystal Carapace is. +3/3 and has Ward. So nice little kind of protection in there. We have Epic Proportions, +5/5 in Trample, and then Prodigious Growth, +7/7 in Trample. So to make a giant creature smack in your opponent's face and kind of go that way. A lot of redundancy with ways to get it back from the graveyard. Then I want to show a build of Auras. I think Auras is going to be very powerful again. Less Bowmasters means less card draw, means that you're not going to get pinged every time. So this player here, I3OL, whatever I was checking, like pretty much every month they've been mythic with like crazy win rates. 46 and 8 with the deck. So they play a lot of this archetype. So we have Esper Sentinel that can be playable again, Giver of Runes, as well as Selfless Savior's Protection. And then you have your Engine's Core, Spirit Dancer, and Light Paws that get value. Surge of Salvation for protection. Recommission as another reanimation style effect, but notably you can get like any of these back and then it gets an additional counter on it, so you get some value there. And then just a whole bunch of auras. The reason you're seeing a lot of one-ofs in this list is because Light Paws lets you tutor for a different aura with the same CMC, so you can find situational auras as relevant. Solidarity gives you Vigilance and a token and First Strike. Zeal gives haste, so you can kind of kill that same turn. Combat Research is card advantage, and for your Light Paws also gives Ward. Escape Velocity for haste. Ethereal Armor gets bigger for each cop, for basically looks at your enchantments, gives them plus power for that. Flare and Aegis for big butts, and it lets you tap down a target so you get rid of blocker. Rift Bloom for flying. Immolation can be removal, but also just a pump. Kai's Ghost Form, very helpful against removal, keeps getting it back. Sentinel's Eyes. Vigilance, solid footing, deals damage with toughness, so the Spirit Dancer naturally is going to have a higher toughness. Sticky Fingers gets you Menace, and then lets you get treasures, and then Staggering Insight for lifelink and card draw. And then it's a Laris Companion deck. So I'm going to cover a couple decks here. So this site here is Mythic FYI. So the creator of the deck had reached out. We were working on some, I think it's a very clean deck list view. Really nice as well on the snapshot view. So things we were working out. So take a look. Posting some decks. There's some decks there as well. And just offering like some feedback as it kind of goes. So this is a deck I've been playing in best of one. Like I said, I copied Mistman's best of 3 list. You'll see some sideboard cards, but if you want the full deck list, go to Mistman's website, mistman.com. Mistman plays a lot of blue-white controls, pretty much my go-to to see, well, what it was kind of go. So what I did with this deck was I tweaked it for the best of one meta. Divine Purge, very good right now. I like my Wandering Emperors in here. I went full Snapcaster Mage. And a card that got much better right now is Kalim. This card was, with Bowmaster, really unplayable. But I like this as an encounterable. It's a good tempo play. Oftentimes Wizards only has 1 or 2 creatures, so tapping down in the combat step is really good. And the big thing with these cards is they all replace themselves, so you're getting card advantage. Kalim gets back, Reprieve gets back, you have March as well as Fragment as cheap removal. Change the Equation hits a lot of the format right now. Archmage Charm, counter draw. Deluge for card advantage. The Purges, a cool interaction. You could purge your own Snapcaster. While it does get taxed, you get to recycle to rebuy the effects like that. A lot of good utility lands mixed into here as well. I've been really liking this. Like on Untapped, It's only tracked me 2 games, but I was playing a lot on mobile with it, and I think I'm like 8-0 or something like that. This is like one of the few decks that's been working for me this month when I've been on the ladder. So this is the new combo deck. So the combo I tried sticking into red-white artifacts. So it's basically just guide now, but how it works is you have this new card, Dedicated Doll Maker. So when it enters the battlefield, the Doll Maker itself, you get to exile another target non-land, non-token permanent, be yours or your opponent's. Its controller creates a token copy of it, except it's not legendary and is an artifact in addition to its other types. So what you do is the Doll Maker makes a copy of Saheeli Rai. Then Saheeli Rai -2, you target yourself because Saheeli is an artifact. So it makes a copy of Saheeli. Then you make a copy of Saheeli each time. And then with Reckless Fireweaver, the Fireweaver enters whenever an artifact enters the battlefield, deals 1 damage to an opponent. So each instance of Saheeli deals 1 damage to your opponent. So you kind of get around there. Now, notably, you can't win through the 1-ring fog for a turn, so you do have to wait a turn. That's kind of the combo there. So there's a video up on this today. I did go 1-4 with it, but there was 2 games where basically we were a turn off from comboing. Our opponent either had exact lethal or they hit like, there's one game they went 1 ring to fog me for the turn, and then they drew exactly Ossification and a removal spell. So they hit both my Saheeli and that. Like, really good draws that could have gone either way. The one thing, like I said, Karn shuts off this combo, which kind of sucks. One suggestion was using the innovative meta tech because this seeks mana value 2 or less. Because the Ingenious Smith doesn't get either like any of your combo pieces, the meta tech can find your combo pieces in both the Doll Maker and the Fireweaver. So that was something that was a little bit better. But you're still using like the Barb Spike, Retrofitter Foundry, Ornithopter, Yotai package, which felt pretty powerful on its own. Using stuff like Mana Confluence, Spire of Industry to kind of splash. I would probably tweak the mana base and just play, like, instead of the Hallowed Fountains, because like really the only blue mana is the Saheeli Ray. But I think with the Spire of Industry, I would probably just make these Hallowed Fountains instead. I took a bit too much damage in a couple of games from the mana. And then lastly, Gruul Bard class. This is another deck with a video up. This was a fun one, and it either did incredibly stupid things if we drew Bard class in our opener, or kind of did awkward things. Not a tier 1 deck, but if you're looking for a fun deck, definitely something to consider. So Bard class, basically level 2, makes our legendary spells cost 2 less. And then if we get to chapter 3, whenever we cast a legendary spell, we exile the top 2 cards of our library. We can play them that turn. So Delighted Halfling and Ruby are 2 great additions to the deck. They both allow us to ramp. This makes our legendaries uncounterable as well. There's a bunch of cheap creatures. So Ruby, Gallia, Hajar, Targnarg, all are basically free in the deck once you get Bard class going. So it lets you chain, especially if you're on chapter 3, you kind of storm off, play a bunch of cards. Mox Ambers as well trigger the card advantage, but gives you mana. Burgi generates mana. Goro Goro can give haste to everything for the turn, as well as Samut gives all your things haste. So basically, you get to a point where you can pretty much play your entire deck and then just haste your creatures and smack into your opponent. You have Kodama, everything gets counters because of Bard class, so everything gets trample. Just a lot of fun lines with this deck. Dom Rays, Midskin Boos, all kind of mixed into it as well. But that's it for the week. Let me know what you've been playing, what you think of the new format. If you're in agreement with me that Karn needs to be shot into the sun and just banished from every format possible. And we'll catch you next time. Thanks for watching.